This week's guest is Zak Lefevre. Zak is the CEO of ChargeLab, which makes software that manages EV charging equipment. His company has raised over $20 million of capital to date, and his business is booming with large international partnerships. In this conversation, we talk about the world of electric cars, the future of charging stations, and how startups are funded and operated. Hope you enjoy this week's episode. Zak, welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael, great to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. I would love to start off by hearing your journey. We were working at the same company at one point in probably 2010, 11, 12, something around there. And then you started ChargeLab in 2016. And just for the audience, it was kind of like zero funding for VC. For the first 3 years, you got a bit more funding, and then you just had a blockbuster raise in May 2022 this year of $15 million US, I believe. So I would love to hear how that journey started, because $0 raised for 3 years sounds like you were probably eating, I don't know, mac and cheese or in that startup life. And
ramen.
Ramen noodles. And then all of a sudden you have this big liquidity event potentially. So I would love to learn everything about the startup in this episode. And I'm sure the listeners are super excited as well. Particularly, like, it just seems so great. You know, you work your butt off, and then all of a sudden you raise $15 million and you have TechCrunch profiles. You're on newspapers or whatever the case may be, podcasts, all that type of stuff. So I want to know how it started. So can you tell me a quick, brief story about where were you when you had this idea, and how does something this big come into fruition?
Absolutely. Happy to give you the ChargeLab story. Before going into the history, though, ChargeLab is a tech startup. We make software for managing electric vehicle charging stations. So we don't build any hardware, but we basically build a software layer that sits on top of EV chargers. And for that reason, a lot of time people call us the Android of EV charging, because we're not building the hardware, we're just building the software. But you can think about EV chargers as the gas pumps of the future. You know, when you fill up a gasoline vehicle, you go to a gas pump, you fill it up. You don't think too much about that transaction. You take out your credit card, you tap it. But there's a lot of technology behind there to get the gas to the station, to get into your vehicle, to make sure it's measured correctly. So we do all of that, except on the electric vehicle side of things. And what's really interesting is there's actually going to be way more EV chargers than there are going to be gas pumps. Because today, when you refill your gasoline vehicle, you go to a gas station and you pump gas. But I drive an electric vehicle. I've driven an electric vehicle for several years now. I mostly refill at home. So I have an EV charger at my house. I plug in and refuel. When I used to go to different office spaces, there were often EV chargers I could charge at there. And then, of course, I still do charge at kind of on-the-go gas sites, but far less often. So there's actually going to be way more refueling locations in the future. And we provide the back-end software to manage all of those EV chargers, to collect payments from EV drivers, to make it easy for EV drivers to charge, and then to really help manage the profitability of this enterprise for the building owners that decide to install these EV chargers. But to back it all the way up, like you said, to 2016, that's when I incorporated this company. I was actually getting really interested in electric vehicles the year before, in 2015. And at that time, there were not a lot of electric vehicles. There was a Tesla Model S available on the market, which was a kind of super premium sedan. There was the Nissan Leaf. There was some hybrid vehicles like the Chevrolet Volt with a V. I now drive a Bolt with the B, which was just coming out, had not yet come out in 2015. But yeah, there were, 5, 6, 7 models available on the market. But I just got so interested from going to these events originally in Montreal, actually, and test driving electric vehicles. And I had always had this conception that they were somehow deficient to gasoline vehicles. They were like a nice green alternative, but they had to be, inferior in some kind of way. And the experience I got in 2015, even driving these very early electric vehicles, is not only did it match the gasoline vehicle experience, but it far exceeded it. I was driving around in this kind of dinky little Nissan. They've done a refresh. It looks a lot more like a regular car now, but back then it looked like this kind of alien spaceship. But it was completely silent to drive around. So all of a sudden you feel like you're 100 years in the future because your car's not making all this noise. It accelerates like a BMW, but it's this like lower cost electric vehicle. And it became very clear to me at that point that EVs were the future. It was just a question of how quickly they were going to be adopted. And we see that now. I was just traveling this week. I was at the airport, and every time I go to the airport, there's electric vehicle ads plastered everywhere. I'm sure you've had your eyes on all the different vehicles. Test driven a Tesla or looked at the kind of new electric Audis, Mercedes, everything that's coming out down the line. But again, that was not the case back in 2016. I just had a thesis that this was going to be a big industry and I want to get into it. So we started the company in 2016 and we said, okay, usually infrastructure is something that people forget about, right? Like we all love Amazon Prime and being able to get deliveries in one day. But the only reason that's possible is because there's great roads, there's great gas stations, there's internet infrastructure. Like all of that is the infrastructure which enables us to have Amazon Prime. Can't have Amazon Prime without roads or big distribution centers or all this other infrastructure that needs to get put in place. So I had a thesis that EVs were going to be the way of the future insofar as how we move around. And also I wanted to work on the infrastructure side because I actually think it's less sexy. I think everybody kind of wants to design the next new electric vehicle or kind of something on the front end, but infrastructure is much more on the back end. But because it's less sexy, I think there's a lot more opportunities and creativity. And so we started in 2016, and at the time, the market was very immature. So we actually started buying hardware from different manufacturers of these devices and then kind of hacking our own software onto that hardware and then deploying it out in the field. And it was a number of years doing that before the market finally got to the point where third parties kind of started to wake up and say, hey, we need EV chargers. We're going to buy this hardware and we need a software to manage the EV chargers. And so in the past few years, our business has been much less about kind of buying and reselling EV chargers and much more about bundling our software with EV charger manufacturers or with folks who are already buying EV chargers. So we have a big partnership with ABB, which is a multinational manufacturer of a number of different things, but one of the things they make is EV chargers. So they're on our cap table, and we also have a commercial partnership to put our software with ABB chargers and bring them into the market. But ABB is not our only partner. We work with about a dozen different hardware manufacturers. We're deploying all across the United States and Canada. And I think when it comes to kind of the funding side of things, a big misconception in startups is that raising money is the main accomplishment. It certainly feels like an accomplishment. It's certainly a big deal, but really that's just kind of fuel for the fire. And when we raise a $15 million Series A, exactly $0 is going into my pocket immediately. That's going into the business to build our product, expand market share, and build equity value. And then what I have is I have equity in the business, which hopefully will be valuable at a point in the future. But yeah, I mean, you're right about several things. When we didn't raise any money for those first 3 years, it was really a period of what we call bootstrapping. So for most of that time, I didn't have a salary. We had very few other employees, other people working on the business were kind of either taking half their regular salary and equity or, taking a lower salary. We were highly constrained. So it's been great to get the funding in the past few years, which has, allowed me to pay everybody on the team a a living wage, and make big bets and investments in the technology we're building, how we're marketing it, and how we're deploying it, to all of our customers.
So where were you living bootstrapping a business like this?
Yeah, so I actually started the business in Montreal. I was living there at the time.
You like living with your parents, or because if you didn't have any revenue coming in and you have $0 raised, like I'm just curious how you even do that.
Yeah, well, as you know, Michael, we had both gotten, really early in our careers, we gotten involved in this interesting program where it was quite entrepreneurial, and we were able to earn some extra income, and so a little bit of it was definitely eating into savings. But no, otherwise, I had a low cost apartment in Montreal, and in the early days too, it was a very much eat what you kill. We did have some revenue in the early days. I would buy 20 EV chargers and turn around and sell those. And the day that we sold that and that revenue came in, we didn't have a lot of other employees and a lot of other costs at that time. So it was possible to take a little bit of money out of the business. Pretty early on, we also got a loan from BDC, which was very helpful. But yeah, I think it was essentially 3 years of eroding savings to zero, building up a little bit of debt, and just kind of eating what you kill, and taking a little bit of revenue out of the company. But yeah, safe to say that up until our first kind of financing round in 2019, I didn't have much in terms of savings or a backup plan. I had really put everything into the first 3 years of this company and taken a big bet on the company's success.
That's amazing. I love these stories. These are so good. And did you have a life outside of work, or were you kind of in your lab working on these charging stations, programming from morning till the evening and just making this your life, hoping that one day you would hit a big liquidity event?
Yeah, well, I would say today things have really shifted, right? In the early days, we didn't have a finance person, we didn't have salespeople, we didn't have developers. I was doing everything, so I was really busy in the early days. And I think it was a time in my life when, for a big part of it, I was single and I was just really focused on the company and building it. It's interesting because now I actually have more balance. My schedule is certainly very full, but the role I have today, we now have a team of 50 employees, and my role today is much more about making the key strategic decisions for the company. And that takes an ability to step back and kind of read between the lines. And so I would say that I have much more balance in my life now. I'm probably still thinking about work as often, but it's really important for me to get out of the house, go on a walk, exercise, go on a trip, and stop at all the chargers along the way, because I can remind myself of the customer experience while doing that. But in the early days, it was a lot of hard work, because I was doing a lot of the work myself. And I think this is really a plug for people who are starting a business to find a co-founder. In the early days, I didn't have a co-founder, and it would have been a lot easier if I had someone to kind of share the load and burden with. But right around the time we got our first big financing, or right before it, I brought on a technical co-founder, Hassan, and so ever since then, that's kind of accelerated the path of the company. But yeah, no, the early days were definitely just a lot of work, and probably in retrospect, too much working hard and not enough working smart. I think when you start a tech startup, the plan is not to spend 3 or 4 years without external financing. Usually experienced founders raise capital pretty quickly, but I was a first-time tech founder, so there was no other way than to kind of, brute force it for those years in order to get the traction we needed to raise the money.
What would it look like now? Would it be first year you find a co-founder. Then you try and raise, go to Y Combinator or something like that, as you mentioned, as the perfect Silicon Valley story. Is that what it looks like? Just accelerate faster into getting that 10, $15 million round so you can really blow up the business?
Yeah, I mean, if I were starting a new business today, I know a lot of things that I didn't know back then. In 2016, I didn't really know what venture capital was or how it worked. I didn't know all the best practices of how to build a tech company. If I were starting a company today, I would have a set of co-founders, potentially my current co-founder, and we would kind of identify a clear gap in the market in the product we want to build, and we would have a more methodical and systematic way to de-risk that idea. We know exactly what product we need to build to validate the first part of the market. If we needed to raise money to build that product, we'd have access to those investors through the network we've built through building Charge Lab. We'd be able to raise the money. If we don't need to raise the money, we build the first version of the product, prove that it works, and then go out and raise the money. But at the same time, I was growing up on my entrepreneurial journey along with the industry and the market. The EV charging market in 2016 was not ready for the company that we're building today. So it actually worked out quite well that I started very early in the industry and very early in my career. And as I matured as a founder and came to understand how VCs work, what customers are looking for in this market, the market was also maturing. And so all things considered, I have no regrets looking back. But again, now that I'm a decade older than when we first started our first businesses back in the day, now that I'm a decade older, I don't have time to do that again. So if I were starting a company, it would be on a much more accelerated path. But the exciting thing with Charge Lab today is we are taking that kind of accelerated path now. If we look at our funding history, basically we raised 300,000 USD in 2019. We raised another 600K in 2020. Then we raised 4.3 million in 2021, and then we raised 15 million in 2022. And so for the last 4 years, we've been accelerating very quickly, and we've been doubling our headcount every year for the last 4 years, if not more than doubling. 12 months ago, we had fewer than 25 employees, I believe. We're right around that. Today, we're at 50. And so while it took a while to get started, we're now experience this kind of hyper growth where our customer base is growing very rapidly. We're continually hiring. We're looking for great software engineers, great product people, great salespeople anywhere in Canada, the United States. So it's just a really exciting time to be building what we're building. And I also feel very lucky that we are in the right market, because the overall kind of macro situation is not looking great. As you know, the stock market has been down a lot this year, and I think next year is going to continue to be kind of challenging from a consumer spend perspective. And so a lot of startups and a lot of companies are starting to struggle right now. Luckily, we are in this industry that, in spite of the recession, is still growing incredibly quickly. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. But one is that electric vehicles are almost cheaper than gasoline vehicles on a total cost of ownership basis. So as we head into potentially a longer recession, people are actually going to, pick EVs, not because they're cool and sexy and stylish, but because they make more sense for their lifestyle if they're driving around the city a lot and gas prices are going up. So yeah, I mean, I feel very blessed to be in the position we're in, able to continue to grow the company even in a downturn.
That's great. And I know, reaching out to you, you have an executive assistant now. How was that transition? She seems pretty great. When did you decide to get one, or was it forced upon you by the venture capitalist?
Yeah, I think it was mutually decided between myself, my co-founder, my executives, our investors, and I also have a business coach who all felt like it was the right time to get an EA. Melinda does an amazing job organizing my inbox, organizing all of my information. I think it's interesting though, because what's incredible about living in the time we live in is it's easier and cheaper to do almost anything. I mean, the businesses that we used to run, Michael and I, like we would knock on doors and look for appointments, and then we'd go out and give quotes, and then we'd try to close sales. It's a very sales driven business, but you remember how we did that, Michael, right? We picked up the phone, we called people to confirm their appointment, we wrote it in our diary. That was only 10 or 12 years ago. Now you've got tools like Calendly, you've got all these kind of booking tools. So in many ways, I actually think people need EAs far less today than they did before. I mean, I think if we're talking to an audience of other entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, I would really look at, okay, well, what are the ways that I can automate my schedule, my calendar? Can I set up a Calendly? Can I set up email on automations? For me, the decision to still get an EA was that essentially it was much more than kind of just scheduling. It was really getting into the depths of my inbox and prioritizing what different customers are asking, what different partners are asking, what our team is asking. And also now that we have a team of 50 people, it kind of feels like we're a medium-sized company, but in my head we're still a very small company, and I want everybody at Charge Lab to know that they can access me and call me anytime and bring me any issue. And the only way we can do that as the team continues to scale from 50 to 60 to 70 people is with all the great work Melinda does to make sure I'm focused on the right issues. And if someone on the team really has an urgent issue to discuss, they can bring it to Melinda, and she can help make that judgment of, let's get Zak on the phone immediately to talk about that. Or actually, Zak's no longer the right person to help with that. You should talk to our VP of operations, Jerry, or you should talk to my co-founder. And so she's just fantastic at, helping both the company and my life run smoothly.
And how do you pick an executive assistant? Because that's a big deal, because they run your life pretty much. How do you know who to hire on that decision?
Yeah, I think ultimately trust was key for me. I had to find an EA that I could trust, because I don't have time to kind of put other filters and layers in. My EA has direct access to my inbox, and so she understands how confidential and sensitive all of that information is. And so, that's not the way everybody uses an EA. So I think you should work with an EA in the capacity that makes sense for you. But that's how I do it. And so same way I recruit anyone, I reached out through my network. I spoke to people who had successfully hired EAs and understood what they did to find these people. I also spoke to people who had bad experiences. I ended up finding an agency through one of those personal recommendations through another CEO in my network who had found their EA through this particular agency. I went through a rigorous process with them. I interviewed a number of different people, and that's how we landed on Melinda.
Awesome. And your business coach, how did you find your business coach, and at what point did you decide to go ahead with a business coach?
Yeah, my current coach was actually recommended by one of our investors. So one of the nice things about kind of being an early stage startup, or at least the investors we have, is they're very engaged and they're very active. I think one of the problems that can happen in kind of frothy times in the technology market is you'll have investors just cutting checks left, right, and center, and you'll have all this money going to all these startups, but the startups won't necessarily be getting hands-on contact. And sometimes that's a good thing, because sometimes the most valuable thing that an investor can bring is capital. But we were very intentional in picking our investors, and we pick investors that understand our market deeply, or at least kind of what type of technology we're trying to build, and are very hands-on. And so, so one of my investors helped recommend, again, I think I spoke to 4 or 5 different coach candidates and ultimately picked my current coach. And I think, there's, you should always be iterating on these things. Before I had Bob, I had mentors and peers that I would speak to. And I'm just in the process of joining a new peer group now. And so I never see any of these things as kind of fixed in place. It's really, who's the right mentor for me now? Who's the right coach for me now? But yeah, at this point, kind of running a company where we have a team of 50 who are relying on my co-founder and myself and my executive team. We have a number of investors who have trusted us with their capital. I think it's just a prudent thing to do. I think that the perfect example is where you see other coaches, right? You don't see anybody go to the Olympics without a coach, right? And keeping in mind, nobody can run as fast as Usain Bolt. His coach runs way slower, but his coach still brings a lot of value in giving him the right mindset, giving him the right toolbox, keeping him on track. And so that's how I view it. I mean, I think being an early stage company and trying to hyper scale over a number of years it's like the Olympics of business. And to go to the Olympics without a coach would just be would not be a good idea.
And what's it like having a business coach? And is it just weekly calls? Is it a texting relationship anytime? What does that contract look like, or what does that relationship look like?
Yeah, I have an open relationship with my coach where I can reach out and contact at any time. But our main touch point is the 1 hour call every 2 weeks. And again, that's why I would say, you keep these things in flux. At one point I was doing weekly calls with my coach. At another point I was doing once a month. For right now, for my personal life and the stage of the business, once every 2 weeks feels right. With kind of intermittent sharing of articles and thoughts back and forth. But yeah, I mean, it's I would never kind of try to force it or pressure it, right? I mean, I think there's perhaps some coaches who will have a certain agenda and say, well, I only want to work with you if we can do every week or every month. I would say you want to understand what you're looking to get out of a coach or a mentor and try to find someone who fits that, because there's a big market for coaches and mentors. So you should really find someone who's compatible with what you're looking to do.
When you interviewed him, was it more of a qualitative just aspect of how their personality was, or did they have to accomplish a certain amount of tech related startup type of roles?
Yeah, interestingly, most of the coaches that I interviewed had some operations experience. They had worked in the tech industry or they had run a large organization. But the past kind of 10 years of most of their career has been focused on coaching and the discipline of coaching. And not everybody gets into coaching, right? I don't think it's something that I would do, even if we exited Charge Lab and I moved on many years into the future. So I think it's relevant skills are good, but it's much more about someone who's committed to the discipline of coaching and being a great coach and using good coaching methodologies. And frankly, with my coach, where I get, he has built businesses before, but what I get more value from is the other clients he works with, because he works with other founders who are building technology businesses today. So we talk far more about what he's seen in the market or how the mindset and mentality of his other clients. But again, every kind of relationship is going to be different.
And I love this stuff. That's what I'm so curious. Is it paid hourly, salary? How does a business coach work for you?
Yeah, my coach is hourly. He's a professional coach for the tech world.
Love it. Cool. And how does it work with the equity splits? You mentioned you were pretty much having no money for several years, and then you started raising capital, and now you just raised a big round. So how does the liquidity work? Because you mentioned you didn't get any dollars. Sometimes people raise capital and they get a bunch of money during that liquidity event. And how did you decide what your salaries were going to be for your organization?
Yeah. So when I incorporated the company, I owned 100% of the common stock. When I brought on my co-founder, I gave him a significant portion of the equity. The way that investors put money into a company is by essentially valuing the company today. So if you were starting a business today and you had a great idea, but you hadn't built anything, well, I'd say, Michael, we've known each other for a long time. I know how you can perform as a salesperson. So even though you don't have a business today, I believe in your business. Let's say I'm the VC, you're the founder. I believe in your business. I'm going to give you $100,000 and I'll value your business at $1 million right off the bat. And so because I'm giving you $100,000, I'm valuing your business at $1 million, I'm going to take 10%. And so you take that $100,000, you hire your first developers, you write some code, and 12 or 18 months later, you've gotten into the market and you've done quite well, and now you have $200,000 in revenue. So out of that $100,000 investment I gave you, you've got $200,000 revenue. So now you're going to go look to raise way more money. You're going to go look to raise $1 million. And because not only do you have $200,000 in revenue today, but we can see your revenue is going to grow in the future, you're going to go look for an investor and ask for maybe a $10 million valuation. So you'll raise $1 million at a $10 million valuation, and you'll give away another 10%. And then further down the road, you might look to raise, $5 million at a $25 million valuation. And so, you have 5 over 25, you'll give away 20% of the business.
And the first person that had 10%, you would be losing a percentage of the business because there's a new person entering?
Yeah, so then everybody gets diluted equally. So initially you have 100% of the shares, then I invest in your company, I have 10% and you have 90%. And then let's say someone comes in and buys 20% of the company. Well, we're each going to be diluted by 20%. So my 10% is going to go to 8%, and your 90% is going to go to 72%. So what's good is that as soon as the investors come in, you're completely aligned, right? Because now every time I get diluted, my existing investors get diluted. But when the new investor comes in, they dilute everybody else. And so this is exactly what happened at Charge Lab. Like, we had a relatively low valuation. The first time we raised money, we raised $300,000, and that took, and we gave away a significant portion of the company for that first $300,000. But that let us get to the next stage and the next stage. Today, if you were to put $300,000 into the company, you get a very small percentage because our valuation has increased. But this is the other reason you see companies doing multiple kind of funding rounds, because, imagine we're just starting your business, right? And I say, okay, Michael, I really believe that you're going to succeed. I want to give you $800,000, but I'm still going to value the business at $1 million. That means I'm going to own 80% and you're only going to have 20%. And if any other investors come in, you're going to get diluted from the 20%. So if you were a founder, you would maybe come back to me and say, okay, Zach, like, I'm super happy to have you as an investor, but I only need $100,000 or $200,000 now. I'll give you 10%, or I'll give you 20% of the business, but I'm going to keep the rest for myself and for future, dilution for investors to come in. And then what we typically call a liquidity event is when someone purchases the company or we go public. And now that's a fundamentally different transaction, because let's say, Michael Davidson Inc., I was the first investor, I valued at $1 million, next guy valued at 10 million, next guy valued at 25 million. And now the business is going to sell for 50 million. Well, I originally had 10%, but you brought on all those later investors, so I maybe diluted down to 5%. But even then, my 5% of, 50 million is going to be $250,000. Or sorry, my 5% of 50 million is going to be $2.5 million. And so I'm going to be happy that I turned my $100,000 into $2.5 million. You're going to be happy because you are going to have that big windfall. Whatever you own of the company, 50%, you're going to take home $25 million. And all the investors that have invested are going to have it. But The investors that invested later are going to have a smaller multiple, right? Because when you come in very early, you invest at a lower valuation. And so that's how these guys who come into startups with $100,000, $200,000 at the very beginning could turn that into millions of dollars. Whereas when you go to a later stage investor, even someone like a Sequoia Capital or Andreessen Horowitz, they do early stage, but they also do later stage. When you see these rounds of, $300 million, $500 million, those investors are expecting a slightly lower return than the investors who put in 100K on day one.
Yeah, that's great. And is it public, or are you allowed to share what the $15 million raise was based off of on the evaluation for that round?
Yeah, I can't share the specifics, but most venture rounds that you see out in the market are going to have around 20% dilution. Some are going to have 15% dilution. Some will have 10% dilution if the company's doing really well. Some will have 25 or 30% dilution in other cases. But the average is 20% dilution. So,
yeah, times 5.
If you were to value a company, if you were to take in
with that hint,
like a $20 million investment, that usually implies a $100 million valuation.
Right. That's cool. That's really awesome, man. Congrats. And how did, like, for me, somebody walks in with the PowerPoint slide, let's say, and you say, I have this great idea. I hate the charging stations. Why would somebody give you $100,000 for an evaluation at $1 million with all you have is a PowerPoint slide? Like, why do people think that's worth $1 million? Because in, let's say, real estate, I calculate real estate deals and I base it off the cash flow. So if there's zero cash flow, you've been working on it for 3 years, why would somebody give you a first raise with a huge evaluation when there's barely any cash flow?
Yeah, great question. So you notice when I was giving the example earlier, I didn't say, hey, because your business is great or because you got great cash flow, I'll give you $100,000. I said, hey, Michael, because I know you and I know your history and I trust your business sense, I'll give you $100,000. And so that's really the lesson. The earlier in the company, it's going to be based on the founders, their relationship with the investors, if any, and kind of how well you can pitch that vision. And it's not guaranteed at all. There's many people who wish they could raise $100,000 for their startup who can't. Far more people try and fail than try and succeed. But in the early days, it really is about building that trust in founders and having conviction that they can go a long way. Kind of what I did, right? There were not a lot of EVs on the road in 2015. There was actually very few. But I said, one day there's going to be millions of EVs on the road, and we're going to solve problems for that market. What's interesting, an interesting experience for me, is as you go further down the road, it shifts from the reputation of the founders and the strength of the pitch to the metrics of the business. Because today we're not a profitable business, right? We've got lots of customers. We're growing our revenue rapidly, but we also have a product and software development team of nearly 30 people. And that costs a lot of money to operate. But what we can say is we're doubling our revenue every, let's say, 12 months. Or actually, in reality, we're doubling our revenue more like every 6 months. We're doubling the number of stations connected to our platform. And based on this, we can kind of project future cash flows. So as we look to when we do our next financing round, it's going to be much more based on metrics and data from the market. So think of it as a spectrum where kind of in the early rounds, it's 100% pitch driven, 100% founder reputation. And then in the later rounds, it's pure financials. It's pure discounted flat cash flow. How much money is this business going to bring me in the future? And how much do I value those future cash flows today? And so right now, ChargeLab is probably like right in the middle, right? Our pitch is still very important, but our metrics are very important. In a couple of years, we're going to percent discounted cash flow, just like you would value a real estate deal.
Love it. Okay. You mentioned predictions. How did you predict the numbers of EV? Was it very easy to do? Was there data out there, or did you have to kind of figure it out? Did you have to pay for research, or did you just kind of back the napkin crunch exponential growth on the current industry versus where it's going?
Well, this was probably the biggest risk I took because many trends in the world are linear, right? If you real estate investing, for example, is a great example where actually there can be kind of some exponential compounding. But our minds are kind of hardwired for linear thinking, right? If I sell one of something today and two tomorrow, maybe I can sell three the next day and four the day after and kind of grow like that. And this is basically what everybody expected was going to happen with electric vehicles. And so in 2014, there were like 10,000 electric vehicles sold in North America. And in 2015, there were like 20,000. And so if you were to map that out, you'd say, okay, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000. And that doesn't turn into an interesting market at all. But what I noticed in 2015 that was really interesting is, maybe there were only 20,000 electric vehicles sold that year and 10,000 the year before. The year before that, it was like 2,000. And the year before that, it was zero. And so the trend was actually not a linear trend, it was an exponential one. And as I started the business in 2016, the trend continued to double. Basically, all the way up till about 2018. And in 2018, 1% of all vehicles sold in the United States and Canada were electric. And even in 2018, you're like 1%, that's nothing. But what's really interesting is in 2017, it had been 0.5%. In 2016, it had been 0.25%. And so people are not wired to spot these exponential trends. But I really got a lot of conviction around this. And so I said, look, if we're at 1% this year, and a year or two later, we're going to be at 2%, then we're going to be at 4%. And sure enough, last year, global EV sales hit 8.5%.
Wow.
And this year, in August, global EV sales hit 15%, which is basically, what is that? Like one in seven.
That's crazy.
1 in 7 vehicles sold around the world this year were electric, when a few years ago it was 1 in 100. And so that was a big bet I took, was that there was going to be exponential adoption. And it's very tricky because the timing really makes a difference. Like EVs actually aren't doubling every year. They're doubling, like, I would say, every 24 months. And so that makes a big difference. But, still going from 1 to 2, 4, 8, 16, it means we're heading very rapidly towards a world where 20, 30, 40% of all vehicles sold are electric, which is really exciting.
How many percent? Yeah, 1%.
What's that?
What do you think the percentage is going to be for electric vehicles?
Well, I think it's actually going to be 100% sooner than we expect. But I think by 2030, over 30% of the vehicles in the US and Canada, new vehicles sold, are going to be electric. And it still takes time to transition because vehicles last for 12 years sometimes. So even once 100% of new vehicles sold are electric, there's still going to be hundreds of millions of gasoline vehicles on the road. But this is an exponential transition. And, I think if anyone in our generation has children, I think there's a very good chance our children will never drive a gasoline vehicle.
And it'll probably be automated anyway, so they won't drive at all.
Hopefully, I would love that. I mean, that's another trend to look at. That's what I was looking at back in the day in 2015, 2016. There were no autonomous vehicle projects for gasoline vehicles. Every autonomous vehicle project is for electric vehicles. So if you really want to think about the future and where it's going, you say, okay, every autonomous vehicle being developed today is an electric vehicle. The trend for EVs is doubling every 18, 24 months. And that gave me enough confidence to kind of go all in on this idea.
So the way you're seeing it right now, if you're visualizing it in your head, you mentioned that because the fact that there's charging stations within houses, that there's going to be more charging stations than gas stations. So what is your prediction on how many houses are going to be having charging stations, and even with your software on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting for us because today we actually make most of our money from commercial chargers. So we generate a lot more revenue if someone puts a charger in an office building or a condo building or an apartment building or a gas station, because those chargers generate revenue. Those chargers need reporting and monitoring. And those are all of the things that our software does. Monetization, monitoring, power management is another big one. So we make most of our money from commercial chargers, but we are very interested in the residential market, and we do have a software product for home, and it's free right now. So we users can buy a Grizzly Smart Charger, and they can download the ChargeLab app and control their charger for free. But yeah, I think there's going to be millions and millions of homes with single family home chargers. I think it's actually more interesting to think about what homes won't have chargers, because it's kind of like it's an appliance like a dishwasher or washer or dryer, right? When our grandparents were, buying their first home, most houses didn't have a dishwasher. Most houses didn't have a washer dryer, but now every house has that. So I think the only houses that won't have EV chargers in the future are really historic houses that have a very limited electrical capacity, houses that don't have parking. So there's a lot of houses in downtown Ottawa, Toronto, New York, Boston that are kind of just row houses and you park on the street.
Right.
So I think people who are park on the street are going to need places to charge. People who live in very old homes are going to need places to charge. But every new, already developments that are being put up by Minto and these other home builders, every home is being pre-wired for an EV charger today. All the new homes that are being built, just like they'd be pre-wired for an oven, right? Imagine buying a new home and finding there's no NEMA 1450 or 650 oven plug in the kitchen. You'd never invest in a property that didn't have an outlet in the kitchen, because you got to run the electrical. It's another couple $1,000s for you. It doesn't make sense. It's going to be the same thing. Every new home that's being built, they're putting a 240 volt in the laundry room, 240 volt in the kitchen for a oven, unless you have a gas oven, of course. And same thing, there's going to be a 240 volt outlet in the garage for an EV charger.
And you mentioned 240. Is that standard, or is the commercial ones much stronger for the supercharge?
Yeah, so the superchargers are going to be much, much faster. The main thing to actually look at is kilowatts. So kilowatt is a rate of power. It's when you take volts multiplied by amps. So within a single family home, you have basically your 120 volt power that powers your computer, your lights, all that stuff. And you got 240 volt, which powers usually your, if you have a heat pump or an electric heat system, most people, I think, still have gas furnaces in Ontario. But obviously washer or dryer rather has a 240 volt. Your hot tub's going to have a 240 volt. EV charger is going to have 240 volt. But the kilowatt rating, most home chargers are going to be kind of 7 to 10 kilowatts. And 7 to 10 kilowatts will let you refill any electric vehicle overnight. But if you're just stopping for 10 minutes on the highway, that's not enough. If you're stopping at 10 minutes on the highway, you're going to want 150 kilowatts plus. 150 kilowatts is a ton of power. That's kind of more power than a local kind of community center with an arena and all of that would typically draw going into a single vehicle. And for commercial vehicles, 18-wheeler trucks that are going electric, they're working on 1 megawatt charging system. So that's actually 1,000 kilowatts. which is just
That's insane just to think about that. So my sauna, like a very hot sauna heater is like 6 to 9 kilowatts, and that could turn a room pretty hot pretty quick, like up to probably 80, 90 degrees Celsius in like 20 minutes. And that's just from the heat of the electricity.
Yeah, exactly. And so, your sauna is kind of similar to a home charger. It's going to take, 6 to 10 kilowatts. That's exactly where it's at. But if you take a 10 kilowatts, literally 100 times that is what's going to be put into these trucks. And it almost seems to like break the laws of physics, because you have other things like electrical arcing and things like that. If you have too much power charged up here and you have another conductor here, the power can arc and jump over to the other conductor. But there's a lot of really smart people working on all the safety for all of these systems, because obviously people aren't going to drive electric vehicles if they're not, safer and more convenient to fill up than a gasoline vehicle.
I've heard horror stories of Tesla cars just catching fire. What do you know about that? Why does it happen?
Well, this is really an interesting case story, where the real story is new technology catches waves and people like to talk about it. When they looked at it statistically, Teslas are actually way less likely to catch on fire than a gasoline vehicle. I think per 100,000 vehicles, I believe something like 1,500 gasoline vehicles will catch on fire. So I guess 1.5% of cars catch on fire sometime, which is not that surprising to me, because my parents always drove used vehicles growing up, and we had a very old van once, and I remember us pulling over to the side of the road because there was smoke coming out the hood and it just caught on fire.
Oh my goodness.
So it happens. I mean, and you've probably driven the highway enough times to see a smoking hood or something like that doesn't look good. And usually everyone gets out and they're safe, and cops come, firefighters come. But yeah, no, statistically, so I think the study was, 1.5% of gasoline vehicles will catch on fire at some point in life. And out of 100,000 vehicles, it was something stupidly small, like, 22 or 50 electric vehicles will catch on fire. So statistically speaking, a Tesla is actually way less likely to catch on fire than a gasoline vehicle. So mostly this is just a kind of people being afraid of new technology. Now, the one thing I will say in all fairness is, when a Tesla does catch on fire, it is more dangerous than when most gasoline vehicles catch on fire. Because if the hood of your gas truck catches on fire, I believe there's safety to kind of make sure that fire doesn't get back to the gas tank. If it gets back to the gas tank, then you get a movie style explosion. But generally, if you've got an overheating engine and some smoking there, like that is usually pretty contained. Battery fires are very dangerous. So if a Tesla does catch on fire, it's something to watch for. But I also think that the electric
you have 1.2 seconds flat to get out before you explode.
Exactly. I mean, I think safe to say, if you're in any vehicle and it starts smoking, you should get out of it. I don't care if it's gas or diesel or or propane powered. I'm getting out of it when it starts smoking. Yeah, but what I was going to say is that electric vehicle manufacturers are really taking this stuff seriously. So I drive a Chevrolet Bolt, and they found that in certain cases, if you were parked indoors and you were charging from 0 to 100%, and the temperature in your garage was above a certain level, the battery could catch on fire. And because of that, they recalled hundreds of thousands of vehicles. And my vehicle was actually recalled. So I kept my vehicle, but they changed the battery pack. And so, I think the industry is taking this stuff seriously enough, right? And they are, when they spot serious faults, they're doing recalls, just like you would with any vehicle, right? If there's a bad gasket on your Toyota, they're going to do a recall and they're going to fix it.
Do you think it's worth, but if you're building a new home, would you have a fire retardant drywall system in your garage if you were charging an electric vehicle inside of it?
No, well, not above what you do everywhere else, right? I think I obviously follow code. I live in a relatively new home. We have fire detectors on every floor. I don't think we have sprinklers. But when I used to live in apartment buildings, we had sprinklers. But I don't think you need to go above and beyond, because it's really such a low frequency and probability. I mean, and I think when you look at it statistically, right, you have to look at the numbers. Like, it's going to be far more likely that you're going to leave the stove on and your kitchen's going to catch on fire. So I would put extra fireproofing in the kitchen before I put in the garage.
Right.
Or that someone's going to leave their sauna on. I know you've been building saunas and installing saunas for years, so you're experienced, but someone might leave their sauna on and it could short out, and that could cause a problem. So yeah, I wouldn't prioritize the garage above the kitchen or anywhere else, because I think statistically your electric vehicle's way less likely to catch on fire than leaving your stove on, or any other appliance just kind of short circuiting.
Right. So when you raised money, how did you go about raising it the first time and throughout? What does it look like to be a CEO of a company making the decision to raise money, and then how much do you decide? Is it just what you can get at first, and how do you decide evaluation? Do you go through like a third-party lawyer?
Yeah, so in the tech VC world, it's not honestly, it's not a very formal process. In bigger companies, later stage, you have investment bankers. They'll value the company. They'll manage the transaction. But at this stage, it's really about kind of selling the dream and pitching the vision. The hardest check always, always, always is the first check. It was way harder to get the first $200,000 commitment for investment in Charge Lab than any of the subsequent investment. And the reason for that is, if you have the right investors, they will help vouch for you at the next round. So our first big institutional investor at the seed stage was actually introduced by one of our angel investors from the very early rounds. An angel investor who invested in our very first round, he introduced us to the investor who ended up leading the $4.3 million round. And then the investors from the $4.3 million round introduced us to the investor who led the $15 million round. And so it really is a relationship and a network business. But the hard part is always the first one. And it's the same thing, like repeat technology founders have it much easier. People who have successfully built and sold technology companies will always be able to go back to their investors and raise money for a new company. If you are a first-time founder, that is by far the hardest time to raise capital. The general best advice around this which I agree with, is you should really time box it, because it's easy to fall into these traps where you're continually fundraising. And so the best thing you can do is line up a list of the 50 or 100 investors who you think are most likely to invest in your tech company. Not the ones that you want the most, right? Not the most famous, the ones that are the most likely to invest in your company. That might be the most famous or the most attractive, or it might be ones that are local to you or ones that are local to your industry. And you really want to set up a deliberate effort where you reach out to all of these investors within 1 or 2 months, and you spend another month kind of doing meetings and doing pitches, and you really keep a contained window to say, look, I'm drawing a line in the sand, and we need to have a term sheet by this date, or we're going back to the drawing board. Now, the term sheet is usually what you're aiming for. If an investor wants to invest in your company, they will do due diligence. They will meet with your team. They'll look at your technology. They'll look at your numbers, and then they'll write you a term sheet. And the term sheet sets out how much they want to invest, whether or not there's other investors that are allowed to invest in the round. Like, let's say I could give you a term sheet and say, Michael, I'm going to invest $100,000 in your company at a $1 million valuation, and I'll let you take up to $100,000 from other investors. So I put in 100,000, you go find other investors that put in 100,000, you give up 20%. And so that's what the term sheet has, is how much I want to invest, if other investors are allowed, and the valuation, as well as other general terms related to, is anybody getting a board seat? Are there special rights that come with certain preferred shares and things like that? But yeah, I mean, that's basically the process, is to line up those 50 prospective investors and meet with all of them and make it very clear that, you need a term sheet by this date. And again, it's not about being arrogant or rude. It's about making a good use of everybody's time. Like, no investor wants to spend 6 months analyzing a deal. They want to get in, understand the business, and say, okay, I want to invest or I don't want to invest. Um, I think you mentioned kind of incubators. So I think programs like Y Combinator and Next Canada, who's actually out recruiting now. So if folks are thinking of Next Canada.
Yeah, we're keeping it in just for fun. No, just kidding. Did you mention Y Combinator?
Yeah, so I think programs like Y Combinator can be great for getting that first round of financing, because they'll teach you how to think about your customers, building a product, structuring the business, and then going out and pitching investors. So I do think that doing an incubator is for first-time founders especially, is probably the best starting point. And there's local incubators everywhere, in California, in Canada, in Germany, in China, everywhere in the world now there's tech incubators. My favorite one in Canada is called Next Canada, and they have applications open today. So people who are starting tech companies should definitely look at Next Canada. But yeah, these programs are great, kind of walking you through the first steps of how to raise capital.
This podcast is brought to you by The Waking by Michael Davidson. This is my very first book. If you haven't picked it up yet, check it out on Amazon. It's available in all formats, including audio and Kindle. It's filled with tons of personal improvement content. Get your whole life in order by following the guides across all the areas of life. Check it out, and thank you for your ongoing support.
Did you go to Singularity University?
I did. And so that was also a startup incubator program that I did in 2017. It was a little bit different. It was a little bit less focused on venture capital financing, but it was definitely focused on exponential thinking and looking at these trends that would grow exponentially. So that was a great program for myself personally, and for Charge Lab to start to grow up as a company.
So I've read his books, Peter Diamandis, who wrote several books that were pretty mind-blowing on exponential growth, Bold, and some other ones. So how does it work with getting into Singularity University? When I saw that on your LinkedIn, I was quite impressed, because he's world-renowned for his ideas on startups and exponential growth technology.
Yeah, I love Abundance, which is his book on, why the world is getting better. I read another book like that recently called Factfulness, which was fantastic. And Singularity University was amazing, because there was a lot of lectures and direct FaceTime with Peter Diamandis and with Ray Kurzweil, who is another big thought leader. In order to go to Singularity University, I actually competed in a local competition and won a pitch competition. And it was a very competitive program. There were hundreds of companies that applied for this local competition. And the winner, or the two winners, got to go to Singularity University. So I was one of the two winners of that global
cohort.
Impact Challenge.
Yeah, nice.
Exactly. And then Singularity University, the year I did it in 2017, there were 90 people who attended. The program has changed, quite a bit since then. They've adapted to the pandemic. They're continually evolving. But for me, it was really a great opportunity to get in a room with other entrepreneurs who are trying to change the world, and to learn from experts who have built big businesses, who have raised capital, who have worked with the government, who have worked with the private sector. And so the year I did it was a 12-week program down in Mountain View, California. It was really fantastic. And I think it was trajectory changing for Charge Lab.
Did you have to pay for it?
Because I had won this competition, it was actually, my ticket was sponsored by Deloitte. So thank you, Deloitte.
Wow, that's awesome.
And most people who did the program were sponsored, but Singularity, they have all sorts of different programs now. They have executive kind of leadership programs, which are maybe less of a incubator program and more of kind of learning for within a big company. But I do believe they run some early stage incubator programs too. Singularity University was great. Y Combinator is fantastic. Techstars is another program to look at, but there's a lot of really good local programs too. But yeah, I mean, I learned a ton from Peter D, and he's kind of the master of this exponential thinking and looking for trends that are going to compound. You know, he's interested in all sorts of amazing ideas like extending human lifetime, making it exponentially cheaper to get healthcare, going to space and building infrastructure in space. And so just personally, I'm fascinated by all of these things.
Yeah, his story is insane. How he became a medical doctor and then he started RFP, which is a request for proposal on a space university, and then tons of countries sponsored him. And he talked about this concept called super credible or super credibility. When you have so much, I don't know, credibility. He had one of the main people of NASA go on. I think it was like the head of NASA and a bunch of other astronauts. And he says, we're launching the X Prize. And because he had the head of NASA, people couldn't not believe it because he has the head of NASA on board with them on stage. So it's pretty cool how he's completely transformed his life. And his net worth, I think, based on Google, it's not probably super accurate, but it's over $100 million for all of his ventures, which is pretty cool. I'm curious, how did Deloitte, when they sponsored you, why did they sponsor you? Why did they pay their money out of pocket? Did they have an equity play with Charge Lab, or was it just out of their kind of volunteering dollar budget?
Yeah, no, they don't have equity in Charge Lab. They were sponsoring this whole initiative, which was about innovation in Canada. And so they had a whole broader program of kind of promoting innovation. And one of the things they sponsored was, one of the costs to Singularity University. Though I should say that Singularity is quite a unique program because Peter Diamandis is involved personally and all of these things. Most startup incubators, you don't have to pay for. And in fact, I would be very careful as an early stage startup of startup incubators that you do have to pay for. But I do think that the idea of super credibility is great. And I think not everybody can get super credibility from day one, but when you're going to raise money for a startup, like we were talking about earlier, that's essentially what you're trying to do. You're trying to show that you and your co-founders and your mentors and whoever else is backing you is super credible. And that's the journey of Charge Lab too. Like we're constantly trying to build that credibility, right? It's a big deal for us to partner and work with ABB because they're one of the top manufacturers of EV chargers in the world. And while they might not be a kind of consumer household name within the enterprise world, everybody knows ABB. They're a very successful company. And so, yeah, great ideas from Peter and great takeaways from that program for sure.
That's awesome. I'm curious about your philosophy on money. I'm going to have to set the stage here. So the path that I chose was more of I chose the more traditional route, I would say. I took the MBA route plus corporate plus climb ladder, and then take that money, invest it on the side into real estate investment projects. And that's worked well for me. And I love that because it was a route that was very predictable. So if I can develop this many buildings that have this much cash flow, I can be a millionaire pretty early. And it's kind of a guarantee. Whereas I saw the startups, if you're super passionate about something, you love it, I think it's great, but a lot of them do end up failing, right? So I listened to Naval Ravikant. Are you familiar with his philosophy on money? It's basically,
I don't know his philosophy on money. Tell me what it is. I know.
Yeah. He wrote the almanac, or he had somebody write it for him. But his philosophy is just go all in on startups, on huge unicorn plays. Work with people that you can continually work with. For example, co-founders, etc. Because in my job, a lot of the people I meet, if we ever part ways at the job, we never talk again. So I have to continually restart relationships. And a lot of the time in the corporate world, people really don't care about you in general.
Right.
Some of them do, but you don't really talk to people. You have lifelong friends sometimes, but a lot of the time they just kind of part ways. So he's saying, develop those relationships, develop that trust, because when you can build that trust, eventually you can just do another startup together and it's going to be successful, or the output on how much effort they're going to be is going to be there. So he would say, like, go the ramen diet have next to no expenses, live like Zak did, and basically one day you're going to hit a liquidity event, and then you have options from then on. And since you've saved a lot of money, and you're used to a kind of a limited lifestyle, it's very easy for you to adapt, even if you hit large salaries or large liquidity events where you make millions of dollars transferred into your accounts, because you're just used to the ramen diet, right? The corporate life I find is a little challenging because as pay increases, a lot of the time that lifestyle increases as well in comparison. So the savings rate for most people actually just doesn't increase a lot. So that's why we have a lot of people. Majority of seniors have like $35,000 in their bank account, and they're in some serious trouble. A lot of them are handing out flyers at Walmart. So my question for you is, what are your thoughts on money and this style of startup versus the corporate life? One is more secure, but one has more potential, probably. Would you recommend people that are listening to go the ramen diet, work 3 years, not raising any capital, and then hopefully hit that? And if you do it long enough, Naval's theory is, and you work hard and you do what you love, you will eventually make way more money than another route. So that's his philosophy. I would love to hear yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously I've chosen the Naval path in a lot of ways, but it's important to recognize, we've brought on really credible investors. We have really credible customers, but there's still a greater than 10% probability that Charge Lab goes to zero and I walk away with nothing. It's very hard to make these tech companies succeed. And if they do succeed, it can be incredibly rewarding. But what you're seeing right now in the market is the large cap stocks have gone down in value, as I'm sure you're aware. And as a result, all the funding has dried up for smaller companies. And so there's startups that are shutting down left, right, and center now because they can't raise more money and they can't kind of keep going. And once you raise VC money, you're kind of on this treadmill, right? We're spending more money than we make today. That's why we raised a lot of money. But if we don't have the results we need 24 months from now to prove that that $15 million investment was the right investment, we're going to be out of luck. And so I think it's just understanding the kind of risk-adjusted returns that you're looking for. And I think that real estate is a great opportunity. And I think what you've done is very smart in kind of mapping out and saying, if I do these things right and I pick the right properties, I have a kind of guaranteed path to success, whether it's in recession or a booming economy. And I guess the other thing that I would say is maybe that I would add to Naval's philosophy is I really believe that it takes a long time to build up expertise and competence. Meaning, I have been doing a tech startup. I've been doing Charge Lab for 6 years, and I was basically involved in tech startups for a year prior to that. So I've been doing this for 7 years now. And I've learned a lot about VC and hiring and writing code and tech and all of these things. And it would be hard for me to, teach you all of those things in a 90-minute podcast or in like a 9-week podcast. At the same time, you've been looking at this real estate thing for the past 7 years, if not the past 10 years. And there are just models that you've built out. There's things to look for in a property, right? If you and I walked into a multifamily property, let's say a triplex that's up for sale, you would know exactly what to look for. You'd have your checklist, you'd be evaluating it. Whereas I'd be like, what do I do? Right? And so I think that there's many paths. I think that the tech startup one is a wild ride and it's certainly fun. It's also very risky. Like I have far more peers who have failed and gone to working a corporate job than who have succeeded and are, living on a beach, right? Just statistically speaking, far more of my, when I went to pitch competitions 5 years ago, and there were like 20 companies pitching, like 15 out of 20 of those companies are out of business today, right? And two out of 20 are like very, very struggling. And 3 out of 20 are either doing well like ChargeLab or have been acquired or doing even better than us. And so the success rates are low, but if that's the risk you want, but I guess going back to what the other point is, like, I think at some point you commit to a path and you develop a lot of expertise, right? Like 10 years ago, you didn't have an unfair advantage in real estate. If you went and bid on a triplex and there was a super savvy real estate investor, he was going to probably make a better deal on that, right? Because he could say, well, I can underbid this, but I'll get my contractor who has some leftover drywall to come patch this up and I'll fix that. But today you can kind of go head to head, at least in your market, with the best investors, and you can find the best properties, you can find the best returns. And frankly, if I were to go compete with you on a real estate deal, I wouldn't stand a chance. Just like if you were to come into my shoes and go pitch VCs tomorrow, there's kind of a lot of learning that needs to take place. So I think that what's actually more important than whether you're on the real estate path or the stock trading path or the startup path or the small business path, right? There's a lot of great small businesses that don't take any investment, but you start importing something, you start selling it to local contractors, and like all of a sudden you're the biggest supplier of rollers for paint, right? And you just found this little niche. But whatever path you pick, I think being committed to that path and being really rigorous about saying, okay, how do I become the best tech founder that I can be? How do I get better at pitching? How do I get better at understanding technology? How do I get better at reviewing and understanding code? How do I think about product more strategically? Just like you're saying, how do I get better at evaluating properties? How do I build better models? How do I build a flexible model so I don't have to rebuild a model every time? I can just kind of plug in my numbers and go check out a bunch of properties. And so I think what's my philosophy is you have to be totally committed to your path. And I definitely think there are paths that are less fruitful, like working a corporate job and putting aside no savings. That's a dead end. You can't go down a dead end. But working a corporate job, putting aside 30% of everything you make and investing in stocks, investing in real estate, starting a import-export business on the side, whatever it is. But it's so important to be serious. Like, I think the people who win are the people who have the mentality of like, okay, I'm going to run a bakery. I'm selling pastries, but I'm going to make the best pastries in the city, right? And I'm going to do the best catering service. And so every time somebody has a wedding, they're going to call me and we're going to cater it. And we're going to do, 2x, 3x the revenue the average bakery would do. And that's what I try to do, right? I just try to be the best tech founder that I can be. I'm constantly reading books. I'm constantly working with my coach. I'm trying to get better. But the lesson for that is not that everybody should be a tech founder. The lesson is that, if you have a path that's not a dead end path, right? Spending all your money at the club, like that's a dead end path. If you have a path that has a shot at equity ownership and compounding growth, so owning property is equity ownership, then I think just being the best at that is really admirable and over the long run most likely to succeed.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. And how's your life now? What does it look like in the day of a founder?
Yeah, well, I have a very interesting life because I'm married to another tech founder. So we are a two startup household. We travel a lot. My wife and I actually try to travel together. We both have investors in San Francisco, so we try to go to San Francisco together. We both have team members and customers in New York. So I'm in New York now, along with my wife. We try to travel together. I think that what I would say is it is a pretty wild ride building a startup. And so I get a lot of my thrills and a lot of my volatility at work. So I don't go, mountain biking or skydiving on the weekends because, every Monday morning I kind of jump out a plane and I'm like, oh shit, what are the problems we have to fix? So I think outside of work, I have, I try to spend time with my family, spend a lot of time with my wife. We bought a home 2 years ago, and we do little kind of home improvement projects. But I try to get my kicks at work, because you have to have like serenity at some point, in your life. And I know lots of people who have, very easy kind of corporate jobs, and then they're daredevils on the weekend, jumping out of planes. But I'm doing the jumping out of planes during the week, so I need to like chill out on the weekend.
So is it like 9 to 5? I know you're obviously always on call as a CEO, but like, do you have a complete shut off routine? Do you wake up and work out? Like, what's your workout schedule like? How does it work to shut off after work? Or are you always like getting buzzed throughout the night? And what's your weekends look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm much more of an evening person. I get on the stationary bike, in the evening, sometimes after 8 or 9 p.m. Usually get up and go straight to work. We've been remote for 2 years at Charge Lab since the start of the pandemic, but we're moving into a new office space in the new year, so I'm super excited about that. But yeah, I think I'm probably working 9 to 6, 9 to 7 most days, but the early days I was working 9 to 9. Right. It's nothing compared to the early days. Right. I have dinner with my wife. I work out in the evenings. I can take some time off. And I think that balance is important. But I also think it's like overrated. If you're really on the ground and hustling and trying to like start something from scratch, like don't tell yourself you have to have like complete balance. Like it's okay to hustle, and and everybody does it too, right? Like it seems like you have great work-life balance, but when you have a new real estate opportunity, I'm sure you kind of work all weekend to crunch the numbers. You really get into it. And I think the best thing you can have is something you care about working on, because when you're looking at a really exciting real estate deal and you're kind of working late crunching the numbers, you're not complaining to anyone, right? You're like, this is a sweet deal. That's how I feel. Like when I get on a customer call, we have some partners that are in Asia. So when I'm in the evening, I'm like, this is a great partner. I'm super happy to be talking to them. And, I wouldn't rather be doing anything else. Would it be, nice to be on the beach with my wife? Maybe. But like, that'll be for a little bit further down the road.
So weekends, is it off completely, or is it surging? Like you mentioned, sometimes you're working, sometimes you're not.
Yeah. I mean, these days I'm, definitely don't have any meetings and stuff on the weekends. Again, back in the day, you used to. But that is also really important time to like get out and go for a walk and think about the key business problems. Having another tech founder as my partner. My wife and I, we talk a lot about strategy for our businesses, so it all kind of blends together. But I know people who are incredibly effective leaders who work 20 hours a week. I know people who are incredibly effective leaders who work 100 hours a week. And, the older I get, I think it just comes down to style and what type of business you're building and what stage you're at. Very early stage, it's hard for me to imagine a founder who's not like all in, 160 hours a week. But at this stage, it's just as important for me to kind of get out. We have a nice kind of creek by our house, go for a walk, and maybe I'm not even intentionally thinking about work, but kind of key solutions to key problems might just come to me.
Are you in Montreal or Toronto now?
Oh yeah, we moved the company to Toronto in 2018. So started the company in Montreal in 2016, but we moved the company to Toronto in 2018. Most of our team is in Toronto, though we have people all across Canada and the US now. So I live on the west end of Toronto, and
Mississauga area? Or you downtown?
Yeah. Close to the airport. Yeah, Mississauga.
Sweet. And I'm curious, what's the end game for you? Let's say you exit and you have tons of money, and are you just gonna try and shut it off and meditate in the forest, or are you gonna be a VC, or like what like if you had all the money in the world, what would you wake up doing?
I haven't even had time to think about it. I've been like so busy trying to get our product in the market and, treat our customers really well and grow the business. I haven't had time to think about it. I think if we did exit the company many years from now, my first priority is to probably figure out what I want to do.
I love that. That's so funny.
But I have conversations with my father sometimes, and he tells me he's trying to figure out what he wants to do when he grows up. And he retired a couple of years ago now. So
it's hilarious. Well, thanks so much for your time, Zach. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, it was great to catch up, Michael. Great work you're doing on the podcast. And we'll definitely check out everything else you touch.
Thanks so much. Take care.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, please smash that subscribe button for more episodes.